Yeah.
Okay, ladies, welcome. Good morning. We're very happy you all could join us on very early time in the morning on a Thursday. I hope you had a chance to meet, talk, network with each other. It's the networking breakfast for a reason, and we want you all to get a chance to know each other. That said, we also do have a treat in having a wonderful panel put together that we want to make sure we give our panelists enough time. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction and then turn things over to our moderator. My name is Wes Rist. I'm the Deputy Executive Director here at the American Society of International Law. For those of you who are unfamiliar with ASIL, we are a 111-year-old professional membership association. We're founded back in 1906 by then Secretary of State Elihu Root, who looked around and said, we need someone who knows something about international law. And for quite a long time, the Society has filled a role of education and engagement on international law issues from a very non-advocacy and non-partisanship position. We are kind of the last place you can come to have a civil conversation on some of these issues in DC. You may have seen yesterday, we continued that engagement mission through the present day in things like our webinar series. So just yesterday, we had International Law in the Trump administration on strengthening cybersecurity. That series puts together senior former government officials from both parties, along with an expert moderator, to talk about particular issues of importance to the timely current events of the day that have an international law component and U.S. domestic policy component. Next week will be the next in that series. That's on nuclear security and non-proliferation. We've got a wonderful panel put together for that. It will be Wednesday at 11:30. You can watch for free online at asil.org/live. The last of those series, we're taking August off because it's DC and it's August. The last of those series will be on the use of force and armed conflict in international law, and will actually be held on September 11th. And so it will be a wonderful way to engage with those issues on a very timely date. Briefly, the Willig Mentoring Program, I'll leave to Tracy to introduce, but was started several years ago, and to build off of this program itself, actually, the Willig Networking Breakfast. To my knowledge, this is, I believe, the 7th year we've actually done this. Always in the summer, always in the morning, just a chance to get people together to talk and engage on these issues, and also to make sure that we're building a community. ASIL has worked very hard over the years to improve its representation of women in the field of international law. That has not always been an easy thing. Speaking as an old white man, it is very much an old white man field still. We're challenging that consistently and trying. Just two very hard statistics to point out. At the annual meeting, where we have over 200 speakers participating in our sessions, the last 2 years we've had gender parity on all of our panels and all of our speakers. In fact, the 2 years ago, it was 1 more man than women. This year, it was 2 more women than men on our speakers list. So we're very proud of that. We work very hard to maintain that. But one of the things that we've learned that we need to do is to foster and grow up new generations of international lawyers among women. And so that's one of the purposes that Willig serves, our Women in International Law Interest Group. And we're very pleased to have coming down from Boston today one of the co-chairs of that interest group, Tracy Roosevelt, and I'll turn things over to her to introduce our panelists and talk a little bit more about the discussion today. Tracy.
Thanks, Wes. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. We have an incredible panel today with excellent experience to share with you. I just wanted to tell you first a little bit about our mentoring program. We have pods all across the United States, usually actually not even across the United States, across the world. I think in 17 cities across the world most recently. And the number of mentees ranges up to, in years, we have approximately 150 mentees. So we encourage you on your way out to take an application and apply to be a mentee next year, or if you have over 3 years of experience, to apply to be a mentor. And it's a great program. Like Wes said, the American Society of International Law is really trying to foster a new generation of women leaders. And that's one of our goals here at Willig in the Women in International Law Interest Group. So this morning, we want to have an informal discussion to the extent we can. I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I encourage our audience to jump in and to ask questions as well, so we can have a discussion and learn from our great panelists. So I'm going to very briefly introduce them and then ask them to say a little bit just about how they got to their current position and any big steps along the way. So to my left is Ruchi Gill. She is an international trade associate at Covington and Burling here in DC. To her left is Siobhan McInerney, and I might mess up the McInerney-Lankford, and she is senior counsel here at the World Bank. And to her left is Leslie Vélez, and she runs the U.S. Protection Unit for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Washington. And so I will just start, and maybe we could go down the line.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So as Tracy mentioned, I'm at Covington and Burling in the DC office. I joined the office in May, so I am relatively new to law firm life. I graduated from law school in 2013, and I had been working at the State Department through law school prior to law school, and so I went back to the legal advisor's office immediately after I graduated. I worked in a number of different areas throughout my time at the State Department in a policy capacity and in a legal capacity. And my most recent position at the State Department was as the special assistant to the legal advisor, who was Brian Egan, and one of the speakers at yesterday's cybersecurity event. And so big changes that led me to a change in my life had to do with, honestly, the job that I had before working for the legal advisor. It was a wonderful opportunity. It really gave me exposure to a whole range of legal issues that are worked out of the State Department. And the State Department's legal advisor's office kind of functions like a general counsel's office. And so they handle employment law issues, they handle accounting law issues, they handle use of force issues. And I was able to work on all of those issues and felt, okay, I'm thinking about a change. The election happened, started thinking more seriously about a change. And so I moved over to Covington, which is where I had summered when I was in law school. And so I'm currently working on some trade remedies matters. I'm also working on CFIUS matters. CFIUS is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and it reviews foreign acquisitions of U.S. businesses for national security concerns. And I'm still honestly trying to figure out my path at Covington and what all I will be working on. I've picked up an international arbitration matter, and it's been only 2.5 months. So hopefully, a year from now, if you contact me, I'll have a little more to say about it. But that's sort of how I got to where I am now.
Siobhan, thank you.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really always delighted to participate in ASIL events. I was co-chair of the Human Rights Interest Group, so I also appreciate the work and important function of the interest groups. So I am a senior counsel at the World Bank legal department, and I've been at the World Bank for 15 years. I started at the front office in the legal department, working with the then General Counsel on human rights issues, really in a research capacity. And from there joined a unit which is called LEGN, which is Environment and International Law, that looks at the safeguard policies. And from there, I did a short stint, well, not that short, 2.5 years in the policy department, where there was a newly established human rights trust fund, which is still there. It's called the Nordic Trust Fund, and it's a Nordic funded initiative on human rights, knowledge and learning initiative within the bank. And it was then housed in what's called OPCS, which we're great for our acronyms. That is just the policy department. Yeah, we're really keen on the acronyms. And that was a great experience for a couple of years. So that was a fledgling initiative at the time. And because of the sensitivity of human rights issues in general, and for the bank in particular, I think it was felt that it was useful to have a lawyer embedded in the team. It was brand new, and it was a fantastic opportunity and a really exciting thing to be part of. From there, I came back to the legal department because I was lonely for the lawyers. That's a sad admission, but it's true. I missed the craft. I missed being around legal issues, lawyers, tackling legal problems. And when I returned, I did more what we call operational work, which is transactional. That is drafting and negotiating the financing agreements that the World Bank concludes with its client countries. And now I my work has sort of two dimensions. One is more advisory on international human rights law, public international law, international humanitarian law, sort of more on a policy advice side of things. And then another dimension, which is operational. And that's the bread and butter of the bank. That is drafting and negotiating the loan agreements. And that I do primarily for Francophone African countries. And it's very intensive. One of my colleagues is here in the front row, Andrea, who's been in the trenches with me, and I think can attest to how important and essential that work is within the bank and within the legal department. Also how challenging it is. Volume, I think, is a big issue. So it's been a great 15 years and really enjoyed it, learned an immense amount. I'm only struck by how fast the time has gone. Thanks.
Good morning. Again, thank you for inviting me to this panel. I feel kind of humbled to be in a room full of women with this interest, and I fully appreciate the effort actually to build the new generation. So this is actually quite nice. So thanks for letting me be a part of that. So I am the head of the U.S. Protection Unit for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. There is a regional office here in Washington that covers about 24 countries in the Caribbean, as well as the United States. My line is that I only have to cover one country, and it's the United States. So as you can imagine, in light of an influx of refugees along the southern border with the terrorist attacks around the globe, we've been on our toes for the last couple of years in particular. So I graduated from law school thinking that I was going to be a tax litigator. And that was in 2002. So along the way, and I'm happy to share details, but I'll just get to the point, is, my first job before getting an LLM was to litigate, to get those basic skills. And one of my clients actually made a huge difference. So I liked tax law because it is statute, regulation, implementing memos that can be rescinded at any time, that have, can make huge changes, and just being on the cutting edge of that. Well, the only thing I would argue more complicated than tax law is US immigration law. So I still had the ability to do the brainy legal aspects of it, but the clients changed for me, as probably did my income projections for the rest of my life. But it was a huge shift for me personally. And from that, I had to convince immigration law firms when I didn't have a single internship. I didn't have any experience whatsoever doing refugee, immigration, nada. Okay, so I had to build and zigzag and figure out what I wanted my trajectory to be, and to gain as much experience as I could along the way. So I went from big firm litigation to small business immigration boutique, increased my pro bono work as much as I could, until the work that I was doing on the pro bono side was something that I wanted to do. And I left a law firm a year shy of partnership track to gain peanuts with a national non-governmental organization that is a resettlement agency. And I spent almost 6 years there. And during that experience, it was a resettlement agency, so it resettled 10,000 refugees per year. It still kind of does, which, to put into context, is more than the second largest country, which is Australia. So it's a large number. It also provided social services and legal representation for unaccompanied children. And in the US context, there's a separate immigration, or a separate asylum process for unaccompanied children. And then the organization, was the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, also had a lot of work focused on representation for detained torture survivors. So torture survivors who ended up coming to the United States, who were in detention and in the asylum process. So extremely vulnerable, particularly being where they had come from and the context in which they were being held, and attempting to navigate the complicated US asylum system. So from that, I went from direct representation, many different clients seeing the same issues, to a position where I could work on the systemic issues and change, building up then capacity for legal services, capacity for social services, really looking at the problem from a very holistic sort of way. So I think on this panel, I'm bringing in the big time delivery of humanitarian aid assistance on the ground, and having done that in the US. Everyone thinks, well, I need field experience. Well, there's lots of opportunities for field experience here in the United States as well. And so most of my future remarks on this panel will be, in light of that, but I'm happy to share more details as we go along.
Well, that segues pretty well to my next question, since it seems like you've made some choices along the way. And I wanted to ask what each of you thought was the advice you would give your previous self. So maybe yourself at 23 about your career. And maybe we'll mix it up a little so that we don't go, right in order. Siobhan, do you want to start?
Sure. What would I have told my 23-year-old self? I would have said, stay the course. I was very linear in my approach. I wanted to do international human rights law, and I pursued that really as far as I could take it academically. I did as many internships as I could along the way. I think I would have just said, carry on. If you have an idea, particularly an unpopular one, my father was always trying to get me to do property law and conveyancing, of course, with, well-intended advice. Or people would say that at the time I was studying human rights law, there was something called mad cow disease had erupted and was causing a major problem in Europe where I was studying. And, these gruff Irish bureaucrats would turn to me and say, there's no money in a dead man. They would say to me as I was studying human rights law, and I quickly quipped back that there was no money in a dead cow either. So we were sort of even. But yeah, of course, decent jobs in international law are hard come by. Decent jobs in international human rights law, particularly hard come by. I think your experience it demonstrates that really well. So what I would have just said, stay the course and don't be distracted. If you have an idea, if you have a particular, commitment to a particular area, pursue it. Just go to the end of it and don't be deterred.
So what would I tell myself? I think I took the decision-making process throughout my career very seriously. I took myself very seriously, more seriously than I should have. And I harped on decisions and thought really long and hard about whether it was the right decision, when really it wasn't about right or wrong, because there's no straight path, as you can tell. And so I'd say follow your gut. That's sort of something that I found myself doing. I'm sort of discovering as I'm going that that's the basis on which I make my decisions. I always had an interest in international issues, in part because my family is from India. I was born and raised here, but I started traveling at a very young age and developed this interest in other cultures and other issues. And based on that interest, I had this general concept of what international work meant, but didn't really know what that role would be for me. And honestly, still don't know what that role will be for me. I'm still sort of going through this journey. It's a journey for all of us. And talking to people, of course, is immensely helpful along the way, because you'll get ideas, whether you agree or disagree, whether you want to follow their exact path or don't. It's an opportunity to just get an understanding of what else is out there. So at the end of the day, I'd say trust yourself, but don't trust yourself too much.
I would echo that, because it's so important. So, figuring out who you are and why you're even interested, and staying the course, if you will, but being true to who you are, is really difficult when you've just graduated from law school. You more than likely have huge debt now, having financed that, and it seems like there's a path, forward, and you might be isolated and on your own, saying, I want to work with refugees on the border between South Sudan and Uganda. It's like, what? How does that fit in? And I guess the main message is that if it's in you, then just, really trust that and honor that. And if you stay true to that, you might end up a little alone compared to, different trajectories that other people are taking. And indeed, sometimes people, are like, well, are you opining on my trajectory? It's like, no, I'm just doing my own weird thing. But you just stay with it. And I wish I could have told myself that at 25. I mean, I did it, but it feels a bit isolating. And on the contrary, having the gumption, if you will, to really design, to articulate what it is that you want, and finding ways. Oh, here's the second piece of advice I would have told myself very young, is that the burden of the law school, the expectations on parents of like, when are you going to get a job, is not only is it okay, but you are actually in an ivory tower of opportunity, because you do not have a family. For typically, you do not have children. You have the luxury of, if you need to figure out what to do with the loans for a couple of years and literally go to the border or go to Geneva or find what you want and find a way to, add value, whether it's with an NGO or something. Like it's really hard for, I would say, anyone here to be able to drop and do that, and if you have that opportunity, I mean, really see that as an ivory tower of luxury. I mean, you've got the time and the space, and instead of looking at it as, I don't have a job yet, the pressures are building, make the most out of it.
Great. As we said in the beginning, Willig cares a lot about mentoring. And so I was wondering if there's one mentor or a few mentors that really, affected your career or inspired you, and if you could tell us anything about that. Why don't we start at the end and work this way? So,
I don't get time.
Sorry to have you go twice in a row. I don't have the algorithm quite right.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about one individual, and then I'll talk about a category of individuals. So the person who actually taught me immigration law is Kathleen Campbell Walker, and this woman is such a precision, just a precise technician, lawyer. And, I lived and breathed it for 2.5 years with her. And she really taught me how to be technical. She taught me to read the code. I would cite it back to her. She's like, no, open it up, read it again in a current context, something else will come out at you. That comma all of a sudden has importance. And in working with her too, she placed a lot. She held me very accountable, but placed a lot of trust in me, and was able to teach me along the way of how to trust my own judgment and my own technical abilities. So I really appreciate that, and to this day, it's still someone that I am very grateful to have her in my life. The second category is that it wasn't until I was like, what is all this international human rights stuff? How do you shepherdize it? So I couldn't figure out. I kept reading human rights first, and it was fabulous, but I was like, it's all being regurgitated. Like, how do I be a lawyer in this realm? Because remember, I was going to be a tax attorney. So I was looking for an online class, and 2 years later, I came out with a master's of international human rights law in a very small program where I think there was 20 of us, and we might have been the largest cohort, but had the tutors were, ended up being UN special rapporteurs for torture, for extrajudicial killings, and just amazing people. And I will say that entire opportunity let me see it as, oh, everyone's just a person, even though this big title of like, we are all human, we're all trying to make it work. But also the people that were in my cohort, the other students, I went in at 36. So half my cohort was older than me and half of them were younger. And to this day, I feel like they're my board of directors, if you will, being able to, thank God the pubs in England closed at midnight, because I could have just been talking with them, and I was up again at 6, experiencing this, but the ability to understand approaches to human rights law from many different disciplines, and really understanding the humanity of everyone. I mean, it's a built-in network, but I really have to say that their mentorship, both in, I was like, so how do you guys have babies and live in Afghanistan? That is extremely valuable to me as well, and has made a huge difference.
Great. Well, I had a couple of mentors along the way, 2 that I would mention because they illustrate in different ways the sorts of values that I think are important in a mentoring relationship, but equally personify, I think, how women can be, fabulous role models in international law too. So the first person is Professor Sandy Fredman, who's actually the first female professor of law at Oxford, and she was my DPhil supervisor. So she oversaw my slog through a PhD, and I think, PhDs are difficult anyway. Everybody knows that. Isolating, you're full of enthusiasm at the beginning, and soon you realize that it's this narrowing tunnel, and that by definition you're the only person who can dig your way out of it. But Professor Fredman was she was an extraordinary role model in terms of not just in terms of intellectual acumen and as a teacher, but she I think just her guidance was always dispassionate, very objective. She was extremely rigorous, but also incredibly humane. And then if you get to work-life balance, she was somebody that I remember just drawing a very hard line. And I remember watching her cycling away from a student who was pestering her for something. And she had the baby carrier on the back of her bike. And she said, "My family needs me." And she was gone. I mean, but equally, she didn't drop the ball on any of us, which can happen too. So yes, she also taught me the value of patience and perseverance, especially with something as lonely and as grueling as a PhD, and guided me to treat it as a job. So it was like a 9-to-5 job. There was no sitting around wondering what or going off in different trajectories. We were knocking out the chapters month by month, and I got it done in 3 years as a result of it. The second person, and she's not really a mentor, but she's sort of more of an idol. I don't know if that counts, but Mary Robinson, obviously a visionary, and somebody again who I think personifies the value of again, patience and perseverance. She's been such a stalwart and so consistent. Even when she's been critiqued, she just stays the course. And of course, there are two reasons that her example, her experience, and her path are dear to me. She's also a Trinity College alum, and was a professor indeed at Trinity of EU law, which was my area of expertise before I got into development. And also Mary has been a critic and a partner critic of the bank in our dialogue on human rights. And sometimes, of course, those sorts of exchanges are difficult, but I found her always fair, always balanced. And I know for a fact that her prodding and her challenging have helped us advance our position on human rights, even if there's more work to do. So those would be two mentor / idol, if I can put Mary in that category.
That's
Thanks.
great. Yeah.
I also have had several mentors along the way, and I'd say I really started appreciating that mentorship relationship after I graduated from college, and maybe that's one thing I would have told myself, to try to build that up sooner when I was in college, when I was younger. But the way I've kind of experienced the mentorship relationship is one where I have been approaching people about what it is that they do, trying to get their input on what they think would make sense given my interests, and articulating for them a narrative that I see for myself, and then allowing them to tell me about opportunities and give me opportunities. And they've done that. And that's what I think has helped me along the way. So I had a mentor in one of my earliest jobs who really encouraged me to take an opportunity overseas. And because of that, I felt motivated, and I thought, I can do this. I can pick up and leave. I don't have these commitments right now. And I went to The Hague and I worked at the ICTY for a summer. And had that idea not been planted by my mentor, I probably wouldn't have thought about it very seriously. I'd say more recently, working for the legal advisor, the opportunities that he gave me, the sort of trust that he placed in me, has just, it's given me a lot of confidence about what it is that I can do, what it is that I'm interested in doing, what it is that I want to do. So for example, we were at a meeting with a number of foreign delegations. He asked me to take some of his talking points on Guantanamo issues and deliver them to a room full of 40 European officials. And I looked at him and said, I am not familiar at all with this issue, other than sort of reviewing your talking points before they were put in front of you. Are you sure you really want me to be the one, delivering these points? And he strongly encouraged me to do so, and I did it. And those are the kinds of steps, I think, along the way that mentors have really helped me with, and that I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to undertake without.
So I'm going to do something a little non-traditional and answer my own question, because I realized that I didn't introduce myself. I'm an associate at Foley, Hoag, and I practice both litigation and international law. And before coming there, I clerked for a judge, and she was a female judge in New Orleans, and she in federal district court there. But I was able to create a relationship with her as my boss. And for me, that mentorship that she provided gave me confidence to go into other areas. So I really encourage people to, when possible, when you find a boss that you click with, go forward with that. And then my college professor, who was in a totally different area in history, and a man, became a mentor to me after college and encouraged me to get a master's at the London School of Economics and International Relations, which I probably wouldn't have thought of without him. And so I think that it's great to have women mentors, and I find that I always do, and that sometimes that's easier, but I think it's good to have mentors, male and female. And then lastly, my mentor from the Willig mentoring program is another attorney in Boston who teaches at Northeastern. And what I found with her was that we developed basically a friendship, but a friendship where you also get guidance on your career and different areas to look into. And she encouraged me to apply to be an adjunct professor at Northeastern, or really recruited me to teach investor state arbitration at Northeastern. And without that connection, it's something I never would have thought of. So I think that mentors can be so helpful when they really, kind of lead you to different areas, but also give you confidence. Now, I wanted to ask about something that we always enjoy talking about at these breakfasts, work-life balance. And if you have anything to share about, how you create it, or any challenges, or anything you can give to as advice to attorneys setting out who might want to keep that in mind.
So I have a baby on the way. This is my first child, and I am still trying to sort of figure out what that's going to mean for me. And you can ask me in a few months if I figured it out. But that's something that I talk to a lot of people about, and it was something that I had at the forefront of my mind when I took this job at a law firm, just because it's a big change for me. I'd spent almost 10 years in government, and government has a reputation for being more friendly in the work-life area. I would say that's not always true. It depends on the role that you have. And so my own experience thus far has been that work-life balance is something that is very individualized depending on the phase of life that you're in. And so going forward, it may mean something entirely different to me than it has meant to me over the last 2 years. And compared to that, but I would welcome the input of my fellow panelists, because it's something that I too, I think, can benefit from hearing.
Siobhan.
Thank you. Of course, it's a really important question, maybe the question, right? For this kind of audience, I think it's clear that you have to make choices. You have to prioritize. Those are truisms. Everybody knows that. Clearly, flexibility in the workplace is something to seek out if you're trying to balance. Or it's certainly not going to make your life harder. It will give you a frame within which to make those choices. But I have to say that the choices and the question prioritization is something that really only any one individual can decide for herself. I think being honest with yourself about that, and realizing that sometimes something has to give, and just deciding what that's going to be. Personally, for me, it's the family. It's number one. Something comes up with my family, I'm just not going to be anywhere else than with them if I'm needed. And that clarity about my priority, personal, obviously is completely subjective, but that clarity on my priorities gives me a lot of perspective and a lot of strength for my work as well. And I just think, so yes, work-life balance, of course, but I think you have to be honest with yourself about where the buck stops and what happens when things come into conflict, which invariably they will.
So I'm the mother of a 4.5-year-old, and I've learned a lot about work-life balance. So I also tend to just overwork a lot. I recently, actually, maybe this is a better way, and I might be butchering it, but Zuckerberg's sister, I don't know if you guys had heard that about, she posted something along the lines of sleep, work, exercise, family, friends, pick 3. Which it was, food for thought for a while. I was like, but in terms of picking priorities, so you will always have priorities. And if you are choosing work, then that is your priority. And sometimes you just can't do it. And so hopefully you can have an honest conversation with yourself before it happens, so that it's not a crash and burn situation. And the sooner you can be more honest with yourself, the more that you can manage what's happening at work, what's happening on your personal life, what's happening with exercise. But the way I've reconciled that whole here are 5, pick 3 is that I think that that's true in different phases of your life. And so at a certain moment, your social life and work and sleep might be the only things that are important to you. And that's okay, and then something else changes, like enough of the social life, I need to start exercising, and just knowing that you can't do everything at the same time, but it doesn't need to be a permanent choice for the rest of your life. Just recognize what projects you have at hand. If you're a litigator, you might be preparing for trial. That's a very different phase from discovery phase. And so just knowing that you can't do everything all the time, for longer than 5 years, or 5 months, and knowing what your own personal choices are. And I guess most importantly is that that's okay too. So if someone's like, oh, she just works so much, she's neglecting her family. Yeah, that's what you want right now, or what you feel like you need to do. And you may be actually doing that, and you may not be, but that's your business. And again, it goes back to being true to who you are, and standing clear with that, and once you're clear about that, it helps you see the clarity in other people or the lack thereof. And it just helps with your own confidence. It's a quiet confidence. You're able to approach work a little bit more humbly, or skip out at work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because you have a different priority that day. Just choose, you can do whatever you want. Just pick your priorities that are suitable at the particular time.
Great. Well, I could ask you guys questions for the rest of the morning, but I'd really like to open it up to the audience. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for such a wonderful talk. And in many ways, it's like each of you, I have so many cards which are striking. I'm myself in the same situation. I just finished my PhD doing my book. It's due end of this month. So I'm kind of in a way like yourself. I'm middle-aged. I'm not kind of fresh from the school. So it's kind of you are transitioning, and I changed the country, and from Pakistan originally, now US is home. So a lot of those things happening on the career side, personal side, and like you, it's a lot of decisions to make. One thing that I came across that I want to switch my career from tax law person, which I was in the public sector and the World Bank, to more on the softer side of humanity. I have a nonprofit which I founded in Hong Kong for the last 5 years, to integrate intercultural aspects. So I want to work on that humanitarian aspects of the thing. But then the question becomes, how do you take the decision? Because you're starting from a bottom of the ladder. You're already up here in your own career, like you, for example, you're starting your law firm. So how do you decide that? I have a technical question from you, at the bank, when I was looking at this stuff. So I realized that, okay, I'm starting, or I want to start on a different side of the career. So I would not mind taking a step down. But then I've been advised that, no, do not compromise on those things, because you're setting yourself low, and it's going to set your rate, it's going to set your whatever, the salary and all this stuff for the rest of your life. How do you deal with that thing?
Thank you.
So I can tell you a little bit about my own sort of decision-making process. I I certainly was at a point where I felt like I was very comfortable. I was happy doing what I was doing while I was doing it, realizing that things were going to change dramatically for me. And so it became a question of, am I really willing to try something new, recognizing that it may or may not work out, but willing to take a risk, and also sort of understanding that if it doesn't work out, there's so many other opportunities, right? So it came down to, as I mentioned before, my gut telling me that I was ready for something different, that even though it was different, it would be something that I could explain. And there's no sort of linear way necessarily that has to be the right way to ultimately do what it is that you want to do. And if this is where your passion lies, if this is where you know you'll be happy, then to me, that is the most important driver. Do I think I am going to love the law firm? I have no idea. So far it's going well, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm appreciating that I'm getting very varied experiences from the government experience that I had. And that is the reason why I decided I wanted to do something different. I really was ready. I felt like 10 years in government is a very long time to develop that base, but there's so many other aspects of international work, and why not, branch out and try something else. And so for me, I'd say, if your gut is telling you that this is going to be the right move for you, even if it means lots of change at the financial level, even if it means lots of change sort of at a lower title, so to speak, that's not a bad thing. And you will create a path for yourself based on whatever next move you take, because you will continue to follow what it is that you want to do and what your gut is telling you to do.
Siobhan, do you want to chime in too? And then we'll
Sure.
actually maybe go to the next question, unless Leslie has a burning desire to say something on this too. Okay, great.
So on your specific question to me, okay, if you were asking me my personal advice, it would be absolutely don't take the grade down, and don't sell yourself short, not for a minute. See what you can get. Of course, aim high. I don't think there's any sense in going into something and saying, well, I'm being offered an F or whatever the analyst job, something that you feel is beneath your level of experience and expertise. And if it doesn't work out, it's not personal. I think we're all inclined to kind of look at these things as, highly charged things. They're maybe not, and so by all means, no, go in, aim high. That's been my approach, but it doesn't always work out. Having said that, though, I think the more important piece of advice there is not to get distracted by positions and titles and grades and stuff, even though it's important, of course it is. But going back a little bit to my opening remarks, is stay the course. So think about the thread, think about your end game, your overall objective and the area of expertise that you now own or that you want to pursue. And I really think that focusing on that technical expertise is what eventually will prevail, really. So of course it has to do with luck and timing and connections and all sorts of other factors. But ultimately, if you have a really strong technical base in an area that you're committed to, that you care about, and that you've researched and published on, I really think that's where to focus.
Other questions? Okay, so I'm actually just going to go down the line and take 3, and then we'll have a little bit more of a discussion. So Susie, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Susie. I'm an associate at law firm Refugee, and my question is, could you you've already talked about this some of you, but could you talk a little bit more about what you do sort of on a day-to-day, and how the law degree and also any additional degrees you might have played a role, and how they've added value? Do you feel like you actually use the education and the degrees in your job, or how does that work?
Hi, I'm Erica. Thank you so much for your comments so far. It's been really interesting. So I'm hoping that some of you can talk about transitioning at sort of a more senior level. So I'm a general counsel for a very small intergovernmental organization, and I'm trying to figure out what my next move is now. And so it's the pyramid narrows, but then also there's a lot of really exciting things out there. So if you could give some comments on what you think is different about transitioning sort of mid or even senior level in your career. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm not sure if I'm asking this for all the people in the room who are still interns, who are not yet in the field of law, but going to be in a year or so. It's basically we're all working on this fear that when we go out there, we're not going to get a job. We're not going to get the job that we want, and we might have to sidetrack. But in your respective fields, what changes have you seen for opportunities for women in your respective fields, and where do you see these trends going?
Leslie, can you start for us?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
So my day-to-day job, sometimes I feel like I used to be a lawyer. And sometimes I'm like, wait, I'm not supposed to be a lawyer anymore. So I go back and forth. I am more, I think, in a management position. Sometimes I feel a lot more like a lobbyist. But you know, it's hard, I think, to be in the managerial function as well as the technical function to be the best at both all the time. I actually am a strong believer in separating that. That said, I could have never been able to be in my management function without being able to master the technical function. You can't supervise that unless you know how to do it yourself. And being able to teach or mentor or correct or catch something. And the devil's always, as all lawyers know, in the details. So my day-to-day work, sometimes I feel like the senior reporting officer. Sometimes I'm at the border trying to organize a conversation between 100 women in a detention facility to understand and make sure that I hear what they, want to what they want to communicate. So it varies, and that's actually one of the aspects I really love about my job. In terms of the value of degrees, I don't think you should ever get more degrees unless you need it, unless there's value for you. I mean, I was literally looking for a quick online course, free preferably, that gave me a survey of international human rights law. I can't believe I just admitted to that on the record.
That's great.
And I ended up, with a master's in it. Before my daughter was born, I said that was the best thing I had ever done for myself. And being able to learn, being able to have access, being able to think in those terms. And do I use it every day? Every single day. And actually learning international human rights outside of the United States was particularly interesting. And so I want to encourage anyone to think about studying that outside the US context. And when you finish, you'll understand why. In terms of senior transition, and I wouldn't actually, a quick note about degrees. Also remember, with a law degree, you can do a number of different things. I have seen colleagues that I really respect who have their law degree and never even sat for a bar. They just knew right out of law school that they wanted to go into capacity building, working with international lawyers, looking at IDP populations. I think, actually one of my colleagues, actually worked for ASIL, as well too. And it may seem like, sometimes non-traditional to be in different functions where you're setting up conferences or something. All of this is incredibly important to the field of law, incredibly important. And being able to build up, not just can you do pro bono representation of someone, but can you design a service delivery model to be able to do this in mass, which is actually one of the projects we're working on now. So I just wanted to remind you guys that you can do so much with that law degree. And so feel empowered, especially as American lawyers. One last tidbit about studying outside the United States. For those of you who have earned your American law degree or your master's in the American context, I didn't appreciate the difference in the value of American lawyering until, 5-6 years ago, realizing that, in the European context, I keep reading to the documents today and I'm like, okay, I'm on page 15 and I'm still getting an analysis of the travois. What's the argument? And I'm like, okay, here's one side, here's the other side. I'm like, yeah, and US law schools teach you, you need to know all of that. That's what goes into your analysis. Now, what's the argument? And that is a huge value added in terms of being able to advance, I think, the realm of international human rights law, is to add those kinds of skills. So just know that you have that. If you just graduate from law school, you know how to do this. So I just wanted to emphasize that. In terms of senior transitions, I'm actually going through one in August. So I'm going to back end that question with and I'm sorry for taking it
No, this is
too
great.
much time.
Please take your time.
I'll go through it quickly. You know, I really think that beginning with the end in mind in terms of what it is that you want. And I began with my end in mind when I was 23, and I was like, I could be an academic. I could be a litigator. I had a lot of different bubbles. But it's okay if you have a lot of options, but making sure that wherever it is that you land, you know, that vision of what it is that you want, even though it's a lot, you know, I hated the question, where do you see yourself in 10 years? It really locks you in. But if you say, I could be, or I could be, then everything you do in between that, you know, it's great. Is this on my trajectory? Yes, no. If no, that's it. If it is, then take it. And then make sure that when you're in that job that you're absolutely giving your best. You know, the universe opened a door, you do your best. And also emphasize and get experience in the skills that keep you on that trajectory. And as you go along, like academic, the whole PhD thing, amazing. After my dissertation, I was like, no, out of the question. And that was only for 9 months. And so being able to keep an eye on that and zigzagging your way. So another big thing that's important, I find, is having experience in the government sector, in the NGO sector, in the private sector. All three are fantastic for many different reasons. And even the UN Refugee Agency or the World Bank or the US government, you know, they are bureaucracies at the end of the day. And going up in rank in a bureaucracy is, you know, can be stagnating. Sometimes there's opportunity, sometimes there's not. You might have a job secured right out of law school, and in 10 years you're still in that position. But, you know, having the gumption, again, to zigzag out, right? So I'm being well paid, I might make the same or less, but it's actually a higher parallel position for an NGO. And then all of a sudden, you know, when I came into the UN Refugee Agency, it was, you know, more money than I had ever made in my entire life. I think, you know, well, it was, I wouldn't have gotten there had I not zigzagged in many different industries. So I really push that. And the last question, changes, trends, opportunities for women. Yeah. Okay. So as a humanitarian, I will say that even the UN is big on trying to protect women. And something about the humanitarian field attracts a lot of women. So our office in Washington has a number of women in that, which is a great opportunity, I think. You know, maybe it's part of the nature and international human rights law, the caretaking element of it. But I'm seeing more and more women come into the field. And, you know, in terms of new opportunities, you know, when I had started, there were, you know, you take a job in one place and you stay in that job. And, you know, you may not want to be a mother if you want to have a career. I mean, this was advice that, you know, I received. And, you know, being able to now have the opportunity where now I'm in that generation, you know, and it's just like, go everywhere, do everything you can. You can have a baby too, you know, and really just be true to what you want. And, you know, you might get to a certain point where you decide you're going to have a child, and actually that's what you're going to do for 5-6 years. But mastering the skills, you know, whether it's World Bank, whether it's a private law firm, whether it's UNHCR, basic skills are basic skills, and you can get them anywhere. Can you interview a client? Can you create a safe space for a client to interview them? We call that counseling. You know, can you see their needs across the board? Can you empower them in a way that doesn't usurp their agency? I mean, this is lawyering 101, and you can do that in any kind of field. There's, you know, simple other skills, the legal skills of analysis. But here's the crux of it. So once you master these basic skills, and there's a job posting that you see, and I see this time and time and time again with applications, is that someone from a different field will say, you know, I would like to do work here. And admittedly, our job descriptions are extremely generic. But how do those skills, I know how that person's skills could translate. But I'm asking the question, does that person know how their skills can translate? Because they never really tailored it to what we might need, and even reaching out to find someone who maybe has done a pro bono case for us. You know, so there's some way of accessing whoever your target is to figure out what's going on with them, what do they want, and then tailor whatever skills you have. Say, and this translate, even though I was working for the International Criminal Court, I built a legal service delivery model in Tanzania, and you know, right now with the situation in the United States, those skills might be helpful to you. And I'd be like, oh, that's actually something that, you know, I could do. And many times I don't ever see the tailoring. And so I strongly suggest that. So tailoring it to your trajectory, tailoring it to the job. And I guess my last 2 cents on that is strength finders. I don't know if you guys have ever done strength finders. I love that exercise for women. It's like $5. You can go online, take your own strengths. But I find that women hesitate. You know, what are your strengths? Awkward interview question. You're always going to get it. And, you know, by taking that, it kind of helps you or it empowers you to be able to articulate your strengths as a woman. And women don't tend to do that. And so I just encourage you to figure out what it is that you bring, what it is, you know, and that actually might help you to articulate it, but especially as women to be, you know, confident in what it is that you have to offer, even on the softer side of skills, like who you are. You know, at the end of the day, do I want to work with this person? And, you know, bring that one forward and do so in a confident, you know, yet humble way. Okay.
Thank you. Siobhan.
Great. First question on whether the law degree, the legal training is relevant to or the day-to-day. Absolutely. I can't think of a day where I'm not one, but several of the skills that I learned, not only in my primary law degree, which we do as an undergraduate in Europe, but equally the master's and even a PhD, have been useful. But obviously and there are a number of ways in which I think, just as you were saying, that legal skills are transferable, incredibly versatile, and they're not just about the drafting and the research and the analytical aspects. They're also about the personal and some of these softer skills and the emotional intelligence, a whole bunch of things that you learn in law school. I think a legal training will give you a perspective, a very broad, like the big picture also, and allow you, say, in our work to think upstream and downstream about, say, financing, which really matters for certain types of legal challenges, legal problems. In my work, as I said, it depends on which aspect of it. On the advisory side, I thought that the PhD would not be any use to me unless I wanted to be an academic. Certainly in the US, it's a bit more common in Europe to have PhDs floating around in big bureaucracies, even in law firms. Here, a little less common. You know, either a handful of SJDs, and most of them are going for tenured professor positions. Having said that, the PhD was a way of owning a technical space, very narrow one, but one I really cared about, which was race discrimination law within EU law. So it was a new area around the late 90s, early 2000s. And I would say that on the advisory side of the work I do today, that training, that deep dive training in international human rights law and the rigor and frankly the pain of having to produce this succinct document out of these years and years of borrowing in old libraries and so on, gave me a number of skills that are useful in the advisory function that I have today. Am I advising on EU law today? Absolutely not. But the principles are the same. The treaties have obviously grown in number, but there's the core ones I would have analyzed are still there too. And then broader questions which are of interest to an audience like this around the fragmentation of international law, having mastered at least two, if not three different legal frameworks that are coming into contact, sometimes even conflicting with one another, is really useful to understand the basic precepts that emanate from EU law versus, say, public international law versus the policies and frameworks and goals that define the mandates of development institutions and development actors. I think on the operational side, I think it's more along what the lines that you were describing, which is that certainly my experience in the US, both as an extern in the federal courts, where we were quickly forced to produce briefs that were very succinct and were very troublesome to me, because I had produced these florid 20 pages, and these old judges saying, no, I need 1 page with a recommendation for this motion. Those kind of skills, an LLM from a US law school, I think, prepares you very well for the sorts of drafting exercises that we have to, that in our operational work as operational lawyers in the legal department have to do very quickly. And as I said, the volume is very high certain times of the year, certain regions in particular. Learning to negotiate. I'm not suggesting that our negotiations are what you might have in mind for, say, a big trade deal or something, but it does involve a whole series of skills that I think really only a lawyer has in that combination, I would say. Languages are important too. I know you didn't ask about that, but if you can work as a lawyer in a different language, I think that opens up a lot of doors. So something else that struck me about your question about opportunities for women and trends, I think the opportunities are there and they're growing. I'm thinking of our institution and our legal department. The last 3 general counsel have been women. And the deputy general counsel is a woman, and several of our managers are women. So I actually see a lot of opportunities and growing, and I think they're growing. Having said that, I would say this to a young man as much as I would to a young woman: honing the technical skills and really being able to present yourself credibly as someone who commands a certain area, and I don't mean dominates a field, but is a real expert in a field, is something that's invaluable, because there will always be a need for a particular issue, rather than coming at it with your broad skills. And it's hard because people don't always know at an early stage in their career what exactly they want to focus on. But finding out what that is, obviously the first step, and then pursuing that.
So I agree with everything that's been said. I won't take up too much time on this, but with respect to the question about degrees and experience, I don't have any specialized degrees. I studied international politics, Asian studies generally, and then I went to law school. And I remember when I had applied to law school and was admitted, I had this decision point in my life: do I want to get a dual degree and focus on security studies? And it was one decision that I thought very hard about, and in the end I just decided I didn't want to study for another standardized exam, and I wasn't really sure that the skills I would gain there would necessarily be really helpful. To the extent you're thinking about degrees that are very specialized, that can add to the experience that you've built or help you transition to a new sort of path for yourself, then those certainly make sense. There are, of course, a number of people who have law degrees that then don't practice. And when people ask me today, what's your advice on whether I should go to law school? Think really hard before you decide to go to law school. It's a big investment. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And there is so much that you can do with or without a law degree. And so think about what it is that your sort of goals are. You don't have to have the dream job in mind. You don't have to have the one end goal, but you should have a concept of the type of work that you're interested in doing. And I would just add that languages are immensely helpful. It's really about the skills that you develop, and a lot of the skills that you develop will be through the experience that you gain, not necessarily the education that you have. You'll have the sort of general, how to read a case and how to extract the relevant information, how to ask questions. But until you put that in practice, it's not really going to solidify your ability and your confidence to undertake that. And then on the question with respect to trends, so I think when I was, attending these panels before law school, the question at the forefront of my mind was, do I have to go to a law firm immediately after law school? Is that the trend? Is that the path for women to be able to then transition into other roles? And I think that's one thing that has certainly changed and is continuing to change. I didn't do it. And I hope that continues to be the case. Now, I'm at a firm to this day. I still end up in meetings where I am the only woman in the room, the only minority person in the room. And it's still jarring, but this is sort of the path that I think has to be taken for change to happen. And so it's great to have all of you interested in this field, and I'd really encourage you to just continue with your passions.
Thank you so much to our panelists. This has been, for me, one of the most wonderful mornings I've had in a long time. And it really is great to have you share all of your reflections. I wanted to give each of you a Willig mug.
That's so nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Thank you. And we're going to have some time for some mingling around afterwards, a little, mingling and breakfast. Please make sure to pick up applications on your way out for our mentorship program and to be both mentors and mentees. Thank you so much to ASIL for having us, to Wes, Mary Beth, and Michelle, and to Mark, who is going to just say a couple words before we depart.
First of all, I'd like to thank you, Tracy, for organizing what really is one of the highlights of our year at Tiller House. So thank you all for being here. Ruchi, wonderful to see you on the panel. And Siobhan, I think there was a lot of wisdom conveyed today. I wish I had known some of the things that you had to say when I was starting out. But I particularly want to make sure that we welcome all of you and let you know how important Willie is to this institution. He is our premier interest group. I say that without prejudice to the 34 others. It's really true. It's the only interest group that has its own luncheon at our annual meeting. I think if you walk up and down the staircase in this building, all 3 floors, you will see plaques devoted to the prominent women in international law whom we honor every year. And these are names that are names to conjure with in the profession. Real leaders in the field, people like Edith Brown-Weiss, Joan Donahue, several other judges on the International Court, Rosalind Higgins, former president of the ICJ, and the list goes on. I think what that says is that they are leaders of the profession, they are leaders of international law, and they are leaders of this society. I bring you greetings from Lucinda Lowe, the current president of the society. She was hoping to make it over here and wound up in a client meeting at her firm at Steptoe. So those conflicts continue to happen. But our last 2 presidents have been women. And we're very proud of the fact that 50% of our council is women. And in fact, at the moment, I think it's slightly more than that. 50% of our speakers at the annual meeting are women. And that is something that was the product of a lot of hard work. And we want you to help us continue that. We want to make sure that this is a welcoming and comfortable place for everybody. And we need your help to do that. There are 2 things that all of those prominent women in international law have in common. One is that when they were coming up through the profession, most of them were firsts, and they did not have the kind of support that we can offer today. It's still a challenge, but they surmounted really unbelievable barriers and succeeded and have enriched our profession, enriched our society. The second thing that they all have in common is that they are active members and leaders of ASIL. And I hope that you will follow in their path. There are so many opportunities to be involved here in leadership, in interest groups, not just Willig, but all of our interest groups, and many of them are headed by women. So please take advantage of the resources here. Use this as your point of entry. I know all of the panelists would be glad to continue to advise you. And I think one of the great things we pride ourselves on is that our leaders, all of them, are entirely approachable. You can go right up to any of them, including Lucinda, and all the way down the list. And they will take the time to talk to you about what you're thinking about and how to prosper and make a life for yourself in the profession. And I hope you will make a home for yourself in the society. So thank you again for being here.
Thanks so much.